Quiero ser políglota, es decir, una persona que habla muchos idiomas. Y hace casi un año me embarqué en la misión de dominar el francés. Y presque un an plus tard, mon français n'est pas mal, hein? Creé un método que me permitió mejorar mucho el francés y empezar a hablar con fluidez. Así que sí, decidí hacer lo mismo con el español. Vámonos.
Comenzó a hacer progresos. Creo que ese tiempo, esta vez voy a hablar solamente en español durante yo sé que siempre hay la posibilidad que las personas sean incorrectas. Con la disciplina, nosotros podremos continuar durante los momentos difíciles. Yo sé que lo que estoy haciendo ahora es la única manera para salir de mi situación actual. Nuestro acento es algo también que es importante para ser entendidos y por eso yo quiero dominar el acento.
Solamente en algunas palabras yo puedo decirlo, yo puedo escucharlo, pero es claro, es muy raro. ¿Cómo se dice? Las personas que matan a otras personas. Matador. Asesinos. Solamente tenemos que repetir algo y después de un tiempo vamos a poder hacerlo automáticamente a un nivel muy alto. Es impresionante. Este video muestra exactamente lo que hice para lograr estos resultados. Okay, here's my Spanish background before I started. And here's a breakdown of the steps of this method. I'm working on a video that details this entire process, so subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it, and give this video a like if you find it helpful. In a nutshell, what I did was research the language, learn the basics, reach fluency, and now I'm working toward reaching a native level. Each step of this method was designed with a specific goal, and with 2 exercises designed for reaching that specific goal. Here are the 3 goals. First, learn to put together basic sentences correctly. Second, learn to recall the words that you know automatically in order to communicate with other people. Third, develop an advanced vocabulary and a native level accent. The first thing I did was research the language. This is something that I didn't do when I learned French. I did it this time to understand what I was up against, to be able to build a plan of attack, and to avoid getting stuck down the line. All I did was search Google for things that trip people up when learning Spanish in order to prepare accordingly. Step 1. Learn the basics. The goal of this step is to learn to put together basic sentences correctly. If you're a total beginner, I recommend that you start off with a few weeks of Duolingo, about an hour or 2 a day, so when you start learning with this approach, you'll have confidence and won't feel lost. Learning the basics for me included mastering just 2 things: vocabulary and verb conjugation.
Pensaste.
Here's how I built a basic vocabulary. I only wanted to learn the most commonly used words in the language. Instead of finding and memorizing a list of common Spanish words, I decided to learn vocabulary words within the context of real conversations of native Spanish speakers. To do this, I watched 5 Spanish language TED Talks several times each, with the goal of making all of the words in these 5 videos my base vocabulary in Spanish. I use TED Talks because very often they include perfect, verbatim transcripts written by real humans and not auto-generated. First, I looked up every single word that I didn't understand in each of these TED Talks, and then I watched the videos repeatedly while reading their transcripts until each video sounded nearly as clear to me as English. My goal with this exercise wasn't perfect comprehension of the entire Spanish language, but rather to be able to understand all the words in these 5 videos in context in order to use them to build my base vocabulary. The repetition of watching these videos while reading their transcripts really helped me to understand nearly every word and phrase in these 5 videos.
ojo, eye, coche.
A quick word about flashcards, just FYI. When I learned French, I used a lot of flashcards and a flashcard app called Anki. But now I prefer, by far, learning vocabulary with this new method because flashcards remove the words from their context. This method allows me to no longer have to use flashcards to learn words because I can study all the words and phrases in these videos just by watching all 5 videos every day. I choose videos that are about 10 minutes apiece so I can watch all 5 in about an hour. Studying vocabulary with this method gives you 2 things that flashcards don't: context and pronunciation. To start learning verb conjugation, I developed a method that allowed me to study the most common verb conjugations as efficiently as possible. I researched Spanish verb conjugation and learned that there are AR, ER, and IR verbs. There are also irregular, regular, and stem changing verbs. I determined that the short, irregular verbs in Spanish are the most common and most important. These are the verbs like ser, hacer, poner, ver, etc. I found about 20 verbs like this and decided to spend the most time mastering them because they were the verbs that I was seeing most often in my vocabulary exercise. I also took about 30 verbs that fell into the categories that I mentioned a second ago: AR, ER, IR, regular, irregular, and stem change, and I studied them as well. Verb conjugation is all about being able to recognize the patterns that you find between the verbs. Once you understand the pattern, you'll be able to guess with high accuracy the conjugations of words you've never used before when you want to use them in conversation. For this reason, I didn't study any other verbs apart from these 50, and I spent the majority of my time with the 20 irregular verbs that I mentioned before. The full list of verbs that I mastered is in the description. Here's an example of my verb conjugation study process. I use a Google Sheet to do this.
He would think. Pensaría. They thought. Pensaron. I would think. Pensaría. He thought. Pensó.
Step 2. Get fluent. The goal of this section is to learn to recall the words that you know automatically in order to communicate with other people. Most people believe fluency means complete mastery of a language, but fluency for me is the point where you can easily communicate your thoughts, needs, etc. in conversation even if it's not perfect.
Estoy en Chicago a la casa de mis padres. Voy a pasar un poco de tiempo aquí.
Reaching fluency is the most important part of this method because this is also the point where language learning becomes fun and the point where you become less likely to quit. To get to this point, I use 2 exercises. The first is called a 10 by 10 and the second is a basic speaking exercise. In my 10 by 10 exercise, I did the same thing I did with the 5 videos that I talked about in the Learn the Basics step, but this time I watched 10 new videos with general subject matter 10 times that were on average about 10 minutes long. I read the transcripts while I watched the videos, again in order to be able to better understand them. I repeated this several times per day until I began to naturally incorporate words and phrases from these videos into my active vocabulary when I practice speaking. By active vocabulary, I mean the words that my brain uses naturally without me having to think about it. To date, I've watched these videos hundreds of times, and there's several parts of each video that I know completely by heart. Repetition is key. I continued to watch these videos over and over again, and then I incorporated the second exercise of this method, which is a 30-minute speaking exercise. Here's a video on exactly how to do the speaking exercise that I used for this method. For this exercise, I take one of the videos from my 10 by 10 list, I watch it and take notes on it, and then I use those notes to summarize what happened in the video in my target language. I did this exercise for at least 30 minutes every day, but on a normal day, I spent 4 to 6 hours doing the speaking exercise in 30-minute segments, using the notes of a different 10 by 10 video to speak from each time. After doing these 2 exercises intensively for 30 days, I was able to communicate with other people. Notice, I treat this like my full-time job. I do these exercises on average 8 hours a day, but spent several days working 12 hours a day or more. At this point, I found 2 language partners and started practicing my speaking with them. One I found on Hello Talk, and the other was actually my French language partner's Spanish partner.
A un club deportivo,
Ok. ¿Cerca de tu casa?
como a 1 kilómetro.
That's as far as I went for the 44 days of this method, and this was the result.
Comenzó a hacer mis... Solamente tenemos que repetir algo. Comenzó a hacer... Después de un tiempo vamos a poder hacerlo automáticamente a un nivel muy alto. Es impresionante.
It's been a couple of weeks since I finished this 44-day project and reached what I consider basic fluency. Now I've started the step that I call native fluency, where I try to reach a native speaking level. This part will take the most time and is best not to rush it. This should be relatively stress-free because I can already communicate with other people and use the language for what I realistically need it for in my life. Step 3. Reach native fluency. The goal of this step is to develop an advanced vocabulary and a native level accent. To reach native fluency, I'm using 2 exercises. With the first exercise, I'm developing an advanced vocabulary. For this, I do a new 10 by 10 exercise, but with specific topics that are important to my life. For example, videography is a big part of my life because I make YouTube videos. With this technique, I can get better at videography and improve my Spanish at the same time. This is a very important concept to me because I spend nearly all of my time learning languages. If I wasn't able to study both videography and Spanish simultaneously like this, I wouldn't be able to improve my videography skills for lack of time. This way, I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I suggest you use this technique to do the same, improve in other areas of your life while you learn your new language. I made a 10 by 10 for videography, and I watch it every day for about a month. Then, for example, I'll make a 10 by 10 for digital marketing and focus on acquiring that vocabulary next month. The second goal of this step is to develop a native accent. I do this with something called shadowing. Here's a quick example of me doing it. It's very simple.
Eres pobre, ya, deja de ser víctima.
Eres pobre, ¿ya? Deja de ser víctima.
Y antes de que me juzgues o creas que yo te estoy juzgando a ti
Y antes de que me juzgues o creas que yo te estoy juzgando a ti,
porque no tengo ni idea de lo que vives,
porque no tengo idea lo que vives,
Choose a video of someone whose accent you'd like to have and play about 5 minutes of that video in this manner, pausing the video to repeat each phrase as accurately as you can.
Comencemos por los círculos sociales más cercanos.
Sí, comencemos por los círculos sociales más cercanos.
This is tough at the beginning because it can seem like your accent is way off, even though you're trying your best. Again, repetition is key.
Bonjour à vous, ici David Laroche de la série Wake Up Calls.
Bonjour à vous, ici David Laroche de la série Wake Up Calls.
Every time you do this exercise, you mentally capture a little bit more of the accent until you're able to hear and master even the subtle nuances of each word. Practice. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. To the left is a video showing the method that I use to get fluent in French, and to the right is a video that shows exactly how to do the speaking exercise I mentioned in this video. Check them both out, and I'll catch you next time on Language Lords.